As part of the Japanese 8-8 fleet program, the battleship Fuso was constructed and launched in 1914 as the Imperial Navy's most modern and powerful battleship. The Navy wanted to build 3 more, but Parliament withheld funding as military expenditure was reaching unsustainable heights. Funding for construction of new capital ships was suspended after the second Fuso-class ship, Yamashiro, was laid down in November 1913, and it would be more than half a year until more money was made available. It was in this time that the Admiralty began to study the Fuso-class design and see where improvements could be made when construction on the class restarted. The most prominent flaw, they decided, was the arrangement of the main battery, particularly the turret's midships. Their arrangement was problematic for several reasons. Their wide spacing meant the central magazine, as well as its armoured protection, was awkwardly arranged and unnecessarily long. The central pair of turrets were redesigned to be more efficient and match the arrangement of the fore and aft pairs of turrets. The funnel was placed in front of both turrets, rather than between them. The armour on the turret barbettes, the circular mountings for the guns protruding from the hull, was also thickened. The 152mm secondary guns of Japanese capital ships of the time proved problematic as well. The shells were too large and heavy for the crews, who manually loaded these guns, to maintain an acceptable rate of fire in prolonged engagements. Thus, a 140mm gun was introduced on Issei and Hyuga as a replacement, 8 on each side of the ship. The shells were lighter by around 16 pounds or 7 kilos, reducing crew fatigue and increasing effective rate of fire. To compete with the rising speed of the latest foreign capital ships, the class was lengthened slightly and the boiler rooms enlarged to increase top speed. These adjustments would allow the heavier and larger Issei to match Fuso's 23-knot maximum speed. However, weight-saving measures included shrinking an area of the ship that included the crew's quarters, and combined with an increase in the size of the crew of a Fuso, this made the sailors' accommodation very cramped. By the time redesigning was complete, the changes were significant enough to warrant a new class of ship, which would be named after the first redesigned ship to be laid down, Issei. A second ship, Hyuga, would also be built to this specification. As with other Japanese capital ships, the Issei class would undergo several reconstructions, the first beginning in August 1935 at Kure Naval Yard. New boilers and turbines were fitted, increasing top speed to 25.4 knots. One of the 2 funnels, the fore, is removed, and the stern is lengthened. Hull armour around vital areas is thickened, and torpedo bulges are added. Elevation of both primary and secondary armament is increased, improving maximum range. The original outdated anti-air armament is removed and replaced, with 10 dual-mount 25mm guns. A new rangefinder is also mounted atop the pagoda mast. The first year of war was uneventful for both ships. When the Pacific War began, they sailed as part of a larger force on a sortie to the Bonin Islands, around 1,000 kilometers south of Japan, and were inactive again until March the following year, when they took part in the unsuccessful search for the American carriers responsible for the Doolittle raid. Around the time of the Battle of Midway, Issei and Hyuga sailed north in support of the fight for the Aleutian Islands west of Alaska, and returned to Japan several weeks later. The vital importance and influence of air power, and indeed air support, in naval warfare was not lost on the Japanese Navy, but the disastrous loss of 4 carriers at Midway had severely diminished their naval air power. It was decided therefore to convert Issei and Hyuga into hybrid carriers, retaining some of their main battery, but converting the aft of the ship into an aircraft launch deck. Conversion began in late February 1943. The rear 2 14-inch turrets are removed, and a 40-metre long hangar is built into the rear of the hull, along with catapults to launch aircraft. A maximum of 22 planes can be carried and launched, although the deck is too small for landings. In October 1944, the ships would take part in the Battle of Cape Engao, escorting Japanese carriers in a diversionary attack to draw American forces away from the Philippines. On the 25th of October, the American carriers of Task Force 38 begin the first of 5 attack waves against the Japanese decoy force. At first, the US planes focused on the Japanese carriers, but in subsequent attack waves they engaged the Issei-class ships. Both Issei and Hyuga suffered multiple near misses from bombs and torpedoes, with Hyuga suffering a single direct bomb hit. Neither ship was seriously damaged though, and they were able to retire safely to Amami Oshima, near Okinawa. The ship's final direct contributions to the war effort involved ferrying troops and supplies to and from various island bases. Their final voyage, which began on the 6th of February 1945, saw them transporting minerals and resources back to Japan. The Americans decrypted information about the voyage and attempted to intercept it with multiple submarines, but they were unsuccessful. Both ships arrived in Kure on the 20th of February, where they would remain for the rest of their careers as reserve ships. Beginning on the 19th of March, US aircraft targeted both ships and would continue to bomb them over the coming months. Additional anti-air weaponry was added to both ships, but it was not enough to deter the systematic American raids, which saw both ships struck by multiple bombs in several attacks in July 1945. By the 26th of July, Hyuga had succumbed to bomb damage and settled on the seabed. 2 days later, a final American raid finished off Ise, and she also settled on the bottom of the bay after sustaining 11 bomb hits. The wrecks remained in place until they were scrapped the following year. The Ise-class warships were ultimately a failure in their role as hybrid carriers. Initial plans to fully convert them into aircraft carriers could not be carried out due to monetary and time constraints, so the two ships ultimately became a castrated compromise that failed to live up to their intended role of supplementing the Imperial carrier fleet. Had they not been converted, their impact on the war's outcome would still likely have been negligible. It's quite likely that they would have been assigned to Fuso and Yamashiro's division, and joined them on their suicidal voyage through the Surigao Strait, where they likely would have been sunk by the enormous American force that claimed their half-sisters.